We're going to be going into this because in Acts 16, Paul plants the first Eastern European church in Philippi, and we happen to be doing a series in Philippians, so we figured give you the information that is only available in Acts 16, Philippians, and a couple of here and there mentions in Corinthians. So I want to start by explaining who is here, what's going on in the story, and what the significance of this trip to Philippi is here. So we've got Silas, who was mentioned there. He's a man who was connected to Paul in Jerusalem before they even really got going on what's going on in Acts 16. He actually gets picked up in the chapter before. And they want to start a missionary trip to the province of Asia, that place that mentioned that they were blocked from going. Paul had a history of going on these missions. He would go plant churches. He would go visit churches he had already planted to see how they were doing. And he did that a few times. And we are joining in at the very start of his second missionary journey. And so Silas is who is going with him to do this. We immediately pick up Timothy at the start of the chapter. He's a Greek and Jewish man. He was held in high standing with the people there in his hometown of Lystra, clearly already a believer at that point. And he decided to go with Paul on this journey, or more so was invited and accepted the invitation to go on this journey. But they all at this point believe that they are going to the province of Asia. They had not yet been blocked. They had not yet had a dream. And I want to show you all a little bit of this first missionary journey, because this dream Paul has in verse 6 of the chapter is kind of a big deal. So we have this first missionary journey. I'll show on this screen, so hopefully everyone can see it. This little circle here around Syria, Cyprus, and Turkey is where this map takes place. And so all in all, Paul traveled on boat and foot about 1,400 miles in this little area, planting churches in the regions of Galatia, Pamphylia, I don't know if I said the second one right. I know I said the first one right. And then he also planted in Cyprus as well. But then the second journey here that he goes on was already planned to be bigger, but ended up being much bigger. So this red circle here was the map, about the size of the map that I just showed you. And this blue circle kind of encompasses this map that we now see. Significantly longer journey. The province of Asia is kind of this section of the world and a little bit of northern Iraq, potentially some of modern day Georgia and Armenia, if you know where those are. They're kind of off to the side over here. He pretty much ends up going the complete opposite direction planned, and significantly longer. Like I mentioned before, that first journey was 1,400 miles approximately in total. Just going from Jerusalem to Philippi is 1,053 miles of walking and boat rides. So just the scale has changed quite a bit just in this little bit of time. And then, once we've made that journey, 1,000 miles, we arrive in Philippi, where this letter that we've been reading and we've been being taught on takes place. We have Paul arriving. It says he's there for several days. It's not clear if he was there and then went down to the river, or if he went down there immediately. But eventually, the time comes for him to go and look for worshipers of the Lord. And he does so by going to the river, it says. And this is significant because in most cities, even in the Roman Empire, in most significant cities, there were still synagogues where you could go and find people worshiping the Lord, doing the teachings, practicing Jewish practices. But Philippi seems to not have a synagogue, which means that there are less than 10 male Jewish people living in the city. So this is a very, very Gentile place. So the only place Paul can go to find believers is by the river. And we can go ahead and put up the next slide. This river is not terribly large. It's actually I guess it's really hard to see, but it's that black section between the steps and the grass. But that's where, and it's been built up a little bit. I should say that was not all there in ancient times. That is there now for people to go and see and sit by this river. But so the Jewish practitioners, the people who believed in God, would go down here to worship and to teach each other, and that's where Paul went to teach. And this woman, Lydia, who it's mentioned, that becomes the first follower, the first convert of the Western world, really. She's described as being a wealthy dealer in purple, which meant that she had quite a bit of economic power. Even though she was a foreigner, even though she was practicing Jew, within Philippi, she would have been quite well off. And also the language of her household is significant, because that means that there was people, working for her, potentially also her family, but she had a great deal of prominence. And she managed to be baptized in that very shallow river. Seeing that makes me wonder, was she fully submerged? I know it's a big deal to some people, but, she is very important to our story. It's her house where Paul and Timothy and Silas stay there this next night, one of the few nights we know of for sure taking place in Philippi. And it's her house also at the end of the chapter that the church is taking place in. So she's very important. And, significant, again, that she's a woman. She responds, and it says God opened her heart. It didn't really talk about if any of the other people there did respond to it, but she did. Next couple of people to join the church is potentially that slave girl it talked about with the demon and her. She, it doesn't really say what happens to her, but given the culture around slavery and the culture around Philippi, it's likely that other than the church, she would have had nowhere else to go once that demon had been removed from her. Her job is no longer viable. She's either going to, basically just work a difficult life with no rights for the rest of her life, or she's going to be tossed away and then have nowhere to go. So it's likely that she would have been one of the people taken in by the church. And then Paul and Silas, because of driving that demon out, are thrown in jail. There's a lot of significance to this happening. It's why Paul's attitude at the end of the chapter is kind of like, I'm in charge now. Paul, being a Roman, was due a trial, even with the accusations pitted against him. But because the men who owned this girl, who this slave was driven out of, they said, we can no longer make money. Let's just go accuse this guy of being a problem and get him beaten and thrown in jail. It's very retaliatory. But it should not have happened. Paul, being a Roman, was owed a trial, let alone not owed to be beaten regardless. But yeah, that was just icing on the cake with that point. But so yeah, that's why Paul at the end of the chapter is just in control. He's being able to say, no, they have to come show everyone that they're releasing me from jail. They tell him to leave. He says, actually, I think I'm going to stay a little while longer. I want to see my friends. He doesn't have to listen to them because they treated him illegally. So that's pretty significant. And then we have the jailer. Let's go ahead and put up the next slide, picture of the jail. This guy, oh man, that is really hard to see. Any way we can get these lights right here down a little bit? Or am I just going to have to explain what's going on there? So I'll talk about the jailer real quick while we see if I can show you this picture. He would have been someone who would have had, I guess, a little easier. It's kind of a tough picture. I'll blame this one on the guy this was from a video that Rhett shared with me. Very interesting. It's a guy traveling around Philippi. He could have done a better job of exposing that for sure. Really hard to see, but y'all, I don't know if you can tell, this little room back here, that's not really standing height. Paul and Silas were put in a room like this, shackled up, and they rejoiced. That is incredible. I couldn't be put in a bigger room than that and rejoice. So that's impressive. But they meet this jailer because of their rejoicing. God, sends the earthquake that it mentions, and their shackles are released, the gates fall open, and they are able to leave if they want to, but they do not. The jailer comes, he's ready to commit suicide, but Paul and Silas stop him, and he's so moved by them, by the work that God has done there, that he wants to convert his whole family. And so Paul and Silas baptize him, spend the night. He takes care of their wounds. And then this guy and his family become the next, for sure, members of the Philippian church. And so now that we have the characters that join the church, we're a little bit more than halfway through the chapter. We can go ahead and pull the lights up. This is no longer necessary. Thank you, Peter. We've got this social ladder that Rhett shared through with us last week with the emperor, the Roman authorities military and veterans all up there at the top. And then we're working more with these last three rungs right here, the people in our story. We have Lydia, who we met first, who was more in like the tradesman, farmer, merchant kind of area, but well off in that. She had a lot of economic power, but given where she was on this ladder here, she did not have much social power. She actually had much less than the slaver, or not the slaver, excuse me, the jailer, who would have been a Roman citizen, but because of his job of being in charge of watching the jail, not very economically prominent. He, definitely was not as well off as Lydia, did not have a household, just a family to convert with him. And so you have these weird thing going on with those two of they're on different rungs of the social ladder and then flipped roles on the economic ladder. So that would have been so interesting to get to be there and witness how does that play out. And then obviously if we assume that the slave girl did join, she's got neither of them being at the bottom there. So that would add its own issues of how does she integrate into that community? How do they treat her? How do they, what level of respect does she receive? Does she get to live with any of them? Because she would have nowhere to go. Just a lot of questions left at the end of there. But I want y'all to kind of think through some issues here with me that might be arising from this, from this group that we've put together. So I want you to take maybe a little bit of time. I'll pause with each of these. You can think about it. How would the jailer have viewed Lydia, a rich foreigner? Does he think she deserves her place within Philippi with the economic status that comes with that? How does Lydia feel having a jailer, basically a police officer who she doesn't really know, in her house? And how do their families and households get along? How do they relate to each other coming from such different worlds? And like I mentioned before, what about the slave girl? She likely has nowhere to live, no family of her own that we know of within the area. So where does she go? Who takes care of her and who makes sure that she's included? Who do they do a good job of including her? Yeah, this church, funnily enough, is one that's kind of founded, while Paul is imprisoned in the city. He does not have a good experience, and yet we pull together some people who grow one of the churches that gets the best letters in the New Testament, if you're familiar with those. Philippians is a much more joyful letter than the next few towns that Paul visits after. But it's unclear exactly how long Paul was there, building up this church and building up this community. We know it says several days. We know he stayed a night with Lydia. We know he stayed a night in jail. And we know that for many days between those two instances, he was being bothered by this slave girl. This church didn't need a lot of time to grow to loving Paul. It mentions in Philippians in chapter 4 that this church financially aided Paul when he was in Thessalonica, which he was there. It was 3 stops later. He's there within 6 months of having left Philippi, approximately. And so this church was so willing from their time with him to financially aid a guy they met less than a year ago who's on this mission when he meets them, to make sure that he's taking care of a few cities away. And we'll go ahead and take the slides down. I wanted to make a point to say that there's some pretty significant things going on here. You see, just how seriously the faith of these people was to respond to a man who they just met, who came into town, got thrown in jail, who would later write them a letter, also in jail, still rejoicing about it somehow. They respond so greatly with so much love for him, for God. They catch on to these teachings really quick. And they become a really big place in Paul's heart. They're a place that he loves a lot. You see that he knows, in Philippians, he knows the people there. He knows the issues going on in their church. He knows their names. He speaks to them directly at some points in there. And then, also want to make sure to capture this little bit that happens at the start of chapter 16. There we see that before even heading to Philippi, Paul is encountering the Spirit, not able to go where he and Timothy and Silas were planning on going, into the province of Asia. They have this plan to go out there. It's being derailed. And then Paul has a dream that says, go way out of your way and go to this land you're not familiar with and preach the gospel there. They need you. This is kind of like, as a pastor here in the DFW area, it's like if I planned to go over to, we're in Richardson. It's like if I planned to go over to Dallas proper and start doing missions, but I encounter problems trying to go there. I have a dream, and in my dream, God says, you're supposed to go to Houston and walk there. It's bigger scale than that. Philippi to Lystra, where that happens, is a longer trip walking than Dallas to Houston. But you get the point. It's a big deal. It's like he's encountered something that was supposed to be convenient. He wanted to see a lot of churches he'd already been with. He wanted to stay in an area that was familiar and spread the gospel there. Like, there was good reasons for doing so. But instead, he acts on faith, goes out, and Timothy and Silas with him go out and end up changing history because they respond to the Spirit. There's no American church without the Western European church, and there is no European church without the trip to Philippi. So I'm going to go ahead and call Jacob down. He's going to do a scripture reading, and then Lindsay will come and preach to you.